I don't have a prepared speech. I may not have the most flowing and fancy words, but what you hear from me is straight from my heart. I don't feel that I was denied or delayed. I was destined for this. I believe the Lord has raised up my voice for such a time as this, that this is the moment that He called me into to speak out, to be not just a number, to not just be someone that they read about, but that I'm a human being, to humanize this issue. It's not just a social issue, it's a humanity issue. It's an issue that should prick the conscience of every American citizen that sees what happened to me. To know that but for the grace of God, I could have been them and they could have been me. Because a mistake in your life, a mistake on your worst day, you think about something you may have done that you were not particularly proud of, and how that could have taken your life away from you. You're told that no matter what you do, that you are not worthy of redemption. That if you've made a mistake, we're here at this university.
Okay, thank you so very much, everyone. Welcome here to this phenomenal Clemency event. Clemency, what it was, what it is, what it can be. We're very thrilled to be able to kick this off with a luncheon and press reception with directly impacted people. And I'm going to really turn it over right now to my colleague, my sister, my friend, my angel, Cody. And I know I first met my angel a number of years ago when a set of committees came out, and one of her clients who had just gotten clemency said, wow, when I found out her name was my angel, and she was the one responsible for my release, she truly was my angel. So this is my angel, Cody. She's the founder and the executive director of the Decarceration Collective, and she's going to facilitate and moderate this part. Take it away.
Yeah! All right. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. So why are we here? I want to start by the families of people who are incarcerated and who have been incarcerated. Because what we know is before there was Twitter, before there were Facebook likes, before there were viral videos, there was a family member holding a heart full of suffering and a heart full of hope back in the 1990s, back when it was dial-up, when it was America Online, back when we were sending letters with stamps. So let's make sure when we are writing the history of the struggle for commutation and the successes for commutation, that we start temporally in the right place, and that's with the families who've been fighting for people since they got charged. Okay. And I also want to generally, before we start speaking to each one of you individually, talk about why commutation is important. I think a lot of people think it's important because Roche Brown, Kimba Smith, Norman Brown, and Alice Johnson got their freedom back. And people tend to think that clemency is for them. And it is at the most important level. But we are also the beneficiaries of having them back among us. And so we do this work because they are our trust fund that we are reclaiming. We're fighting for them, but we're also fighting for ourselves. There's no one, I think it's beyond the point of legitimate debate, that we're all richer with Kimba, Roche's, Norman, and Alice's work here with us. So I'm proud to link arms with you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Often reminds us that there's nothing more urgent than freedom. And what does that urgency look like? Clemency is urgent when a person who's never been incarcerated before goes from 0 to life on a first conviction. Clemency is urgent when a judge looks at a human being standing in front of them and says, you know what, I think this law is cruel. I think it's unjust. I think that Congress should change it. But I have no choice in the matter. And so I have to send you to a cage for the rest of your life. Clemency is necessary and urgent when we pay $33,000 a year for human caging of one person, right? So that's why we're here, okay? How many could name 10 people right now who deserve their freedom. We ain't ready. We're not ready to have a conversation about clemency until you can name 10. Because that's what we're doing it for. What are we preparing for if you don't know who you're fighting for, right? So we're fighting for Farrell Scott, who's doing a life sentence for a federal marijuana conviction. And Edward Douglas, whose third strike was 140 pellets of crack. That's who we're here fighting for. We're fighting for Chris Young, who is brilliant and confined and sent to a life sentence at age 22. We're fighting for William Underwood, who's been in prison for 30 plus years. If America can't rehabilitate and get what it needs from a person after 30 years in prison, then that's America's failure, not ours, okay? We're fighting for Troy Lawrence, Steve Lascano, Curtis McDonald, okay? So that's what we need to keep in mind as we go through our day today. That those are the names of the people who we're fighting for. And if you don't leave here with 10 names that you can spout out in any conversation with anybody who is a decision maker, then we need more work. Okay. I want to ask a few questions to our beautiful panel. And then I think it makes the most sense if you'll come up so that we can all see you and hear you on the microphone. I'm going to start with Norman Brown. Please come up. Norman, I first heard you speak 3 or 4 years ago, and my first question, which is my question then, was, where do you source your courage? What keeps you brave? What keeps you strong? And what is the well that you're drawing that from?
Well, that's an excellent question. First, I would like to thank you for choosing me out of many people that received clemency from President Obama. It's truly an honor to have a chance to come before you again over several years that I've been home. My strength comes from understanding that the earth is not rotating on its own axis. There's a force behind it that moves it. And the sun is not up there on its own choice as well. So what I'm saying is that there's a bigger power that exists and that runs this universe. And for when you understand that and you're in touch with nature, you know that there's a force of mercy that is out there. And you know that when you make mistakes in life, that everyone makes mistakes. Some are bigger, some are smaller, some are highlighted more than others. But at the end of the day, if there's a mercy in this universe, I wanted to find a way to connect myself to it. And in connecting myself to that mercy, I understood that there's also a law of forgiveness. And in understanding that there's a law of forgiveness, and I believe that it is, because while I was incarcerated, I was seeing miracles around me every day. There's a miracle for us to go in prison and find ourselves and grow up into manhood, into womanhood. So to see the transformation being real in my face, and to come out and walk the yard, and to see a sun, to see a moon, to see animals and insects, I was trying to find out, how do I connect to that? And then to begin to work on me, work on other people, and see people transform. That was my source of energy that keeps me going even today.
As we move through the day today, and we take this energy to push for the freedom of more people, Norman. So thank you for that. And the hashtag for today is Clemency is Justice. So if you will use that in your social media, that would be amazing for generating energy, momentum. Next question, I will ask Kimba Smith, a Clinton commutee who has been inspiring me. I think I was in high So my question for you is, what does freedom look like in real time for you? And how can we remember that decarceration does not just mean leaving prison, that it also is showing up for people after they leave prison? So how can you think about freedom and your own observations of what it has been and how it has shown up in your life and you cultivated freedom?
That is a hefty one. Thank you so much. Thank you all for having me. For me, for those of you all that have seen 21 Years a Slave, the end of that movie touched my heart so for the simple fact that I could relate to that ending, in the fact that I was leaving behind so many of my sisters when I was granted commutation from President Clinton. And so I can remember having survivor's guilt, and I want to shout out my formerly incarcerated sisters in the room that I was actually in Danbury Federal Prison with and Dublin Federal Prison with. And so even though December 22nd, 2000, President Clinton granted my commutation, I knew walking out of those prison doors that I had to be a voice, that I had to continue being a face for the women and men who are incarcerated just for too long under these drug conspiracy laws. And so even though I was granted freedom, in my spirit, I wasn't completely free. And I was on probation for 5 years. I lost my right to vote. I had to gain that right back. I don't think I got it back until after 12 years after I'd been home. So there's certain collateral consequences that go on with the individual that comes home that makes you remember that you're not completely free. Even if I was to travel outside of this country today and hit that country's immigration checkpoint when you get off the plane, I run the risk, which I did in Canada, of someone telling me that I may have to get on the next plane back to this country because I have a conviction here. And so for me, freedom is so much bigger. You talked about names. My friend Michelle West, she's still serving a life sentence in federal prison. William Underwood. And you know, when I first came home, my conversation revolved around first-time nonviolent drug offenders and how we need to come home and how the sentences are just extremely too long. But when I can see someone go to a courtroom and kill a child or molest a child, but yet I get sentenced 24 and a half years, even though the prosecutor said I never handled, used, or sold any of the drugs, and I'm held accountable for 255 keys of crack cocaine, and that's still going on today. I mean, we have the 100-to-1 ratio that was that President Obama signed legislation for that reduced it from 100-to-1 to 18-to-1. We just keep getting these menial successes. And for me, transformation, I'm going to sit down, transformation, sitting next to Norman, Alice, all of us have great stories. Jason Hernandez, Amy Koval, we all have great stories. We're grateful for this redemption and being able to have our lives back. And for me, freedom for me would have been me getting counseling to deal with the trauma that I had dealt with in being in an abusive relationship with a drug dealer who abused me, and then also I turned myself in 6.5 months pregnant, had to give birth to my son while I was incarcerated, where my leg had to be handcuffed and shackled to the bed 5 minutes after I gave birth to him. So for me, transformation and freedom means that our country needs to look at sensible policy, sensible sentence that makes sense. Because for me today, freedom is still me getting counseling. Making sure that I'm the best woman that I can be, making sure that I can be the best woman in my community. And all of the mentality in this country, to me, for me to have been released from prison so long ago, and we're still having some of these same discussions. Even though I know it took us a long time to get our civil rights and freedom. But we cannot be slack. We cannot expect any less because of the current administration. For me, I'll go talk to Trump, I'll go talk to Sessions, because I want them to hear my story and other stories. But for me, freedom is for me being able to see other people free that deserve their freedom too. And even the drug dealer that I was incarcerated with, I know Brittany got a letter from him. His brother is serving a life sentence, and he's been in prison for over 20 years. But when it's too much, people should be able to be given their lives back and being able to be successful individuals. So thank you so very much.
And Kimberly, you really captured something that I think we often overlook in the conversation, and that is carceral trauma. The trauma that happens to believe, to think that you're going to be in prison for the next 2-3 decades life, right? That is traumatic. And so when we think about words that are unhelpful in the conversation about clemency, this dichotomy between violent and nonviolent, you touched on that, so thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. So I want to ask Mr. Roche Brown, who's been, he's a Ford commutee, President Ford. So you've been walking this road longer than many of us. And for you, my question is, that trauma of incarceration, where does it go over time? What do you do with it?
Merry Christmas. I got my clemency on Christmas Day of '75. You made a mistake. It wasn't Gerald Ford. It was Abraham Lincoln. Where do we go from here? It has been a traumatic experience to come out and come in. And I've often asked myself, how do we adjust? I just read something in the paper yesterday that they're using virtual reality inside of institutions to help folk to adjust who've been gone decades. I've served 30 years and 4 months on an installment plan after I got my presidential commendation. I was arrested twice and went back to prison and got out again. And every time I went in, I worked in the law library. One of the things I found out is when I came out and used the restroom at Union Station, when I got up, the toilet flushed by itself. And I got scared. And I looked down on the floor and got all of them. I'm trying to find out who flushed the toilet. And I didn't know I was finished. And I didn't see no feet. And I looked all around. So as I walked to the Facebook to wash my hands, I kept watching back at the toilet to see if this guy would put his feet down so I can see who flushed it. And as I went over there, the water came out the sink. I wasn't ready for this. The water come out by itself, the toilet flushed by itself. I walked to the door, so I stayed in the bathroom a half an hour, waiting on somebody to come in, because I was afraid of the door. I didn't know what the door had in store. This was some kind of trick. So trying to adjust, we run a program, we started a program called OA, Offender Anonymous, to deal with the social, psychological, and mental adjustments that you have to incur coming out, how to use a cell phone. I forget my own name. At 7 o'clock, I stand up and wait for the count. And there's nobody coming by with the keys. And I keep my keys in my hand. Because when you got keys, that means you're free. You're not allowed to touch keys inside. So I go to sleep with my keys. I eat with my keys. And every time I feel down, I look at my keys and know that I'm here. And I want to make sure that we try to do things to help get the Underwoods out, in the Quail West. Everybody else is in. There's too many of our people locked up for impossible time. Now they're locking their kids. Y'all heard about the school-to-prison pipeline. There's a preschool to prison pipeline. They're locking their preschoolers.
Yeah.
Folks, this has to stop.
Yeah.
We keep talking about mass incarceration. What about mass release?
Amen.
Mass release is what they're asking for. We need mass release. And I can take up much more of your time. I'll just say, do anybody in have a brush? I need to brush my hair. Merry Christmas.
Ask Kimber Smith to come back up. One before we hear from Ms. Johnson.
I just was remiss in saying one thing, in the fact that even as of last night, which I don't share often, but I did have a dream where I was incarcerated, which pops up from time to time. And basically, I was going to be sent to the hole, and I could just remember just that fear of going to segregation. And so I wanted to mention that, in the fact that all of us formerly incarcerated people that come out, I want you to understand that we relive the trauma for the cause. And so I want to thank Andrea James. She's head of the National Council for Incarcerated. I truly did understand the trauma of my incarceration, because we're always just on the go, wanting to do as much as we possibly can. But when she had the first conference at Harvard Law School, where that was the first time I was reunited with some of the women that I was incarcerated with, the Susan Rosenbergs and different women, that's when my body literally like broke down and was shaking and nervous. Number one, I couldn't believe that we were in the same room, but it brought back so many memories of the pain and the hurt and the experience of us just being oppressed. And in the midst of it, still trying to find joy in that oppression. So, Andrea, I want to thank you for what you've done to bring us together, and all the organizations, and bringing us together so we can have a voice.
And last but not least, I have a question for Ms. Alice Johnson, whose freedom, I will say, reinvigorated something in each of us that we were mourning for the last, couple of months, and really showed us that those of us who are not in prison have to make sure that we are not exercising unincarcerated privilege, the privilege of being upset, the privilege of stopping, the privilege of thinking, well, this isn't the time to fight as hard. That's all privilege. That's all privilege. So what you did was remind us that it's really about that moment when you're reunited with your family. So my question to you is, what do you need now? How can we show up for you right now?
Before I answer that question, I just want to thank all of the people who have shown up to support this cause. It is wonderful to stand here and to face women, to face men who have given of themselves and have the hearts of advocates, because it does take a special kind of heart to advocate for something like this. You can't do it for the fame or the acclaim or thinking that it's going to have a big payday for you, because that is not going to happen. It has to be something that is inside your very soul, that makes you look behind prison bars as a free person, to reach behind those bars to people who have no hope. I'm a woman that was blessed to be able to have my voice escape prison while I was still incarcerated, through Skyping, through the opportunities to speak on the council platforms with Andrea James and Topeka and Amy and so many other council members who elevated my voice and allowed me to speak and to bring a human face to a cause.
Yeah.
So I thank you so much for releasing my voice even before I was released.
Yeah.
Thank you. My sisters who are here, it means so much to have family. Two of my sisters are here today, Thelma and Dolores, and I thank you so much for your support, because they have undergirded me. And that is so important, not to just be released, but to have that family structure. So many don't have that, so I am a blessed woman because of that. You ask me, what do I need as a woman who is now free? I need what is taking place now. I need re-entry things, I need rehabilitation. And that dialogue is taking place right now, so I'm very thankful that we can look beyond politics and look at people and what people need. where we can come together as a people and say, let's forget about what is politically correct. Let us forget about what left or what is right. But let us do just what is the right thing to do for people. And the right thing to do for returning citizens is to have something available so that we can reintegrate back into society. Because after there are no more lights, camera, action, there's life. And I've got to be about the business of living life. I've got to have that support that I need, not only myself, but others who are returning home must be able to walk into a life that is not so structured that makes it almost impossible to reintegrate back into society. There are very many barriers to successful reentry, and those barriers are things that we must overcome. And I know that having firsthand walked out of these doors, because I was thrust out. I'm so thankful for that. But from the day that you saw me run across that road, I never stopped running. So we must be able to have dialogue about reentry, about rehabilitation. We must have preparation for those who will one day be returning citizens. Because as myself, I was told not to hope, not to dream, because you will never be free. But I'm a woman who never gave up my hope, never gave up my dreams, never gave up my desire to fight. I don't care what the odds were against me. We make mistakes of putting all our hope in a man. You don't put your hope and base everything on a man, and when that hope dies, you think that your hope has to die. When that transition has taken place, because from all outside appearances and from what everyone was saying, that the Obama administration will be the one that will set me free, but I was still not set free.
That's right.
So to put your hope in a man was not a good thing to do. And not only was I left behind, but many others were left behind also. And I don't know what those reasons are, because we don't get reasons why we're left behind. And it was a feeling of betrayal, because I had so much hope that I was going to come out, and I wanted you to just see me. See me, don't just see what's written about me. See the person who I am today. But that didn't happen, but it didn't happen for a reason. It happened for this time in history, so that you will know that hearts can change, so that you will know that you are never to stop fighting either, that you're not to look at what administration is in power, who's in office, we are not to wait until the administration change to mobilize and go into action. Whatever administration is in power, you've got to be willing to come to the table and sit down at the table. And I'm so thankful that people were willing to go to the table and sit down at the table and not wait for another administration. And I'm standing here as a living witness as a result of people willing to go to the table and talk to whoever has the power of the pen. And that's what we've all got to be able to do. So I'm very thankful to be here today. I'm very thankful that you are using your voices, that you are using your platforms to do what you can to continue to fight, because the fight must go on. Thank you.
That we have to be unshackled from our ideals of who we should be seeking freedom from, that we have to keep fighting regardless, right? So thank you for that. If there are some questions, I think we have about 10 minutes. If there are questions, 5 minutes. 5 minutes. I will talk from anyone in the audience or the press. There's a microphone right here to my right. If you'll come forward and ask a question.
Got one here.
Hi, my name is Chiquisha Robinson, and I work for the DC Public Defender Service, and I manage our prisoner and reentry legal services program.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you. We serve all DC inmates in the local jail, federal prisons, and people returning home. I don't have a question. I have a statement to Ms. Smith. I think I was a freshman or a sophomore in college. When your parents came all the way to my university in Amherst, Massachusetts, and they spoke to a group of us, and they were so compelling and persuasive. And I'm pretty sure it was my freshman year because it was a pivotal moment. And it was after that that I majored in criminal justice. I remember it like it was yesterday, and that's like 19 years ago. And I also have family who ended up going to prison. It's so important what you said about families and the work that they do on the ground to get the stories out. And it's part of my journey of what made me who I am today. So I just want to thank you personally.
I think we have time for one more question. One more question. Bella? Okay, I'm gonna act like the mic's not taller than me. How do we begin to commute the sentences of your families? What is pardon beginning? Where's the mercy for the community?
I think the way that you began to work on.
Mike.
Come up to the mic. Come up to the mic.
Sorry.
I believe that the way that you began to working on the commutations of your family members is that you have to let your voices be heard. You have to encourage them also to work toward being a viable candidate for commutation. You cannot live life crazy in prison and do anything that you think you want to do and be a good candidate for clemency. It's not just about the case. I'm sorry.
So, I've never physically been incarcerated.
Okay.
My mother has. My mother was abandoned. My father has. My brother is in a hole right now. Right? So commutation beyond, clemency beyond who's just in there.
You're talking about the family members?
The family
But
members,
your
their
son.
sisters needed clemency too, right?
Yes, they did. They
Pardon
did
too.
every day of that time with me. The way that my family did this time, we encouraged each other. You've got to not only let your family know that you're there for them, but your family members also have to encourage you too. Because you are doing every single day of that time with your loved ones. There's no separation. The word death in Hebrew is muth, and it means separation. And when you are separated from your family members, it's a type of death.
Yes.
And we have to know that family members grieve the missing out on occasions in each other's lives. And you miss that being together with them because it is separation. So you also need healing in your life too. You also need to come to that place of not hopelessness, but you can do something. And even if you don't see the result right away, it's like a seed that has been buried in the ground. You don't see that it's germinating and that something is happening. And sometimes when that seed is underground, it looks ugly and it stinks. Then one day it pops up and it's something beautiful. So you've got to hold on to that hope too.
And just briefly, continue coming to things like this. Like was mentioned, my parents, they were out there. And one of the things that my dad always said was that he was always going to tell my story. He didn't care who he was sitting next to, what the person looked like, because you never know who you could be sitting next to, what kind of influence they can have. But the harsh reality is too, I don't know how much time your family members or circumstances, but a lot of us that have received commutation had organization backing, had media exposure, but there are people that do not have the resources, that do not have the connections, that deserve commutation too. And so that's one of the reasons why we're filled in this room, so that everyone can get the same opportunities that we've been afforded. And I feel you, and as far as families, I mean, in my opinion, I hold it on our spiritual religious entities, our churches, you know, they should be embracing families. Instead, we're going to live in some of our communities that look like you and I. We don't want to even talk about it because we're scared that that church member over there is going to talk behind our backs and judge us and everything. But we need to be not judgmental of each other and just try to uplift and support one another.
Thank you for your questions. Are we ready to do some work?
Yes.
Are you ready to know, speak, hear the names of at least 10 people who need to be free right now? There's no other time than right now. People in prison are incarcerated right now. Therefore, we are working right now. So we're going to start with our next panel. And Nikita's going to give us a few other announcements.
Yes, thank you so very much. So we're going to go on and go towards the new courtroom. You're just going to go straight down the hall and to the left of the registration is the new courtroom. Get your seat and we're going to get ready to start. All of the panelists, go to the front of the new courtroom to the left. Your seats are there. The Roundtable is a coalition of over 100 organizations working in Washington on federal criminal justice policy reform. And we have been around since 2002, believe it or not, and we're one of the main catalysts behind the passage of the 2008 Second Chance Reentry Bill, as well as the 2010 Fair Sentencing Act, which reduced the disparity between crack and powder cocaine. And we helped to bring value to the clemency initiative during the last administration. So I would like to first thank my angel Cody, who's the founder and director of the Decarceration Collective, for moderating our luncheon discussion featuring Alice Marie Johnson in the room in just one moment, whose life without parole sentence was commuted by President Trump. Norman Brown, whose life without parole sentence was commuted by President Obama. Kimber Smith, whose sentence of 24 and a half years was commuted by President Clinton, and Roach Brown. And he already told us who commuted his sentence way back in the day of Abraham Lincoln, but actually it was on Christmas Day, 1975, by President Gerald Ford. And I think that was a life sentence. 20 to life, yes. So it was indeed an invigorating discussion, which we are about to continue right now with 3 robust plenary panels exploring clemency for drug offenses, what it was during previous administration, clemency what it is during the current administration, and clemency what it can be now in the future. And we're going to proceed as follows. And first of all, I want to remind everyone, our hashtag is clemency is justice. So if you're on social media, do that hashtag thing and share it and all of the above. Let's just rev it up. Let's rev up clemency is justice. So we have 3 panels, which will be about 30 minutes each. I will very briefly introduce the panelists. You should have received robust information about them in your folders. I'm going to pose a general question to each, and they will have about 5 minutes to respond. There are index cards in your registration folder, and if you don't have a card, raise your hand, and one of our volunteers will make sure you have a card. So if any questions pop into your head while the panelists are speaking, write down that question on the card, and at the end of each panel, we're going to look at some of the questions, choose a couple of them to be able to have the panelists respond to. And if we don't get a chance to get your question answers, it's okay. After this proceeding, for those who are interested, we'll just go right across to the lounge. It's just right across there. We'll have cookies there, Roy, and the like. And there'll be time for networking and for photo ops and for interviews and to ask those questions amongst the panelists who are able to stay a few minutes that might not have been able to share. And then finally, before I introduce our first panel, there are 3 specific ground rules for today's clemency conversations. And that also extends to any questions that you might raise on your index cards. First, the focus today is sentence commutation for drug offenses. Second, we are exploring the role of the executive, not the legislature. Third, we're going to maintain civility at all times, which we all do because we are all family. So again, the full bios of the panelists are in your folders, so I'm just going to be very brief with introductions, and now I'm going to pass the first question. But Roy Austin, first of all, I met Roy when he joined the Obama White House as domestic policy counsel and Deputy Assistant to the President for the Office of Urban Affairs, Justice and Opportunity. He also worked with the President's 21st Century Task Force on Policing, and Roy is currently a partner with the law firm of Harris, Wiltshire, and Grannis LLP. And then we also have Rachel Barkow. In June of 2013, Rachel was confirmed as a member of the United States Sentencing Commission. She is Vice Dean and Professor of Regulatory Law and Policy at NYU School of Law, where she also serves as Faculty Director of the Center on the Administration of Criminal Law at NYU. And she previously served as a law clerk to Justice Scalia. I was going to stick that in there.
Big deal.
Definitely, yeah. All sides of the eye, okay. Oh, my brother Jason Hernandez. Jason is one of the most enterprising young men that I have met. He wrote his own application for clemency while serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole, which was granted. Okay, kudos to you. He also successfully assisted 6 others to receive clemency as well. It just kind of reminds me of Harriet Tubman. She went and got her freedom, then she went back south time and time again to free others. I'm sorry, y'all. You know, it's Nikichi up here. He continues to file petitions for prisoners in state and federal systems. And Amy Pofar, oh my goodness, it is really through Amy Pofar that many of the prisoners that are seeking clemency first came to my attention, and I will be forever grateful to you for that. She herself received clemency from President Clinton, and since then she started the Can Do Foundation, which profiles the cases primarily of women deserving of clemency. And she has organized, I don't know how many countless vigils in front of the White House with all those great signs, okay? In addition to being an activist, she's also an accomplished filmmaker. So let's give it up for our panel. Our first panel. Miss Alex, come on down here. You and Ebony, take your places. Yes. And Andrea as well. So, Roy, I'm going to go and start with you, if that's okay. So, as we all know, the Obama administration created an unprecedented commutation initiative. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And in your estimation, what was it like? What went right? If anything went wrong, what went wrong? Give us your perspective with respect to the Obama era clemency initiative.
So thank you very much, Nikichi, and thank you all for being here. Nikichi did not bring me a cookie, which means I don't have to follow the rules that she set out. And I don't know about Nikichi's family, but I'm not sure civility is part of all of our families, but I will accept that dare from you. Look, I think I have to start, even though this is clemency, and I will get to clemency right away, right after this comment. During the Obama administration, there were 219,000 people in the federal system. There are now 183,000 people in the federal system. So, as much as we talk about clemency, we have to look at the entire criminal justice system, which is a complete and total mess at pretty much every single level. I had a list that I was keeping as I was walking out of the door that had about 80 different areas in the criminal justice system that we were trying to reform, that the administration was trying to reform. Clemency is a piece of that, an incredibly important piece of that, but I think we have to recognize that the entire system is broken. We sentence people for too long. We sentence people for the wrong things. We sentence people unfairly based on race, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, mental health, whatever it may be. All of those things have to be fixed. But to move to clemency and what we got right, what we got wrong. Look, I'm biased. We got it pretty dang right, considering the world that we lived in when we were doing this. Okay, President Obama granted about 1,715 people commutations and about 202 people pardons. Compare that 1,900 number to the total number by the past presidents that came through. So President Bush, about 200 people got any form of clemency. President Clinton, 258 people. George H.W. Bush, 77 people. Ronald Reagan, 406 people. So we're close to 2,000, and this was, as Nikichi, I think, described it, what President Obama was trying to do was unprecedented. The other thing you have to look at is there was a real lean in those prior administrations toward pardons. And politically, a pardon is an easier thing to do politically. I'm not saying less important, but certainly an easier thing to do politically generally than is a commutation. Than saying someone who is currently incarcerated, we are going to take them out early, or we're going to allow them to come out early. And that's where so much of President Obama's work was. The other thing is, of those 1,900 people, 500 of them had life sentences. 500. That is an enormous number, considering what we were looking at historically, considering what presidents had done previously. That was what was so important. Now, you have almost 200,000 people locked up in federal prison. I would say probably, to use maybe Van Jones' term, at least 50% of those people could come out. Okay? So that's 100,000 people. For various reasons, probably about 100,000 people could come out, certainly did not deserve the sentences they need, certainly did not need the sentences that they received. There's no reason why we lock people up for 20 years, 25 years, 30 years. We lock people up well past 60, 70 years old when we know they're not going to recidivate, other than just pure vengefulness. What do you do when you have this many people who you need to find some way to help? And what we were able to do as an administration was come up with a system. Was it the perfect system? I'm not sure. But it was a system to try to be fair. Look, I love the fact that influencers, celebrities, athletes, and others are getting on this bandwagon and are helping individuals out. I love that fact. But the problem is that's helping too few. That you need some kind of system that seems fair, okay, that involves all the players in the system. So that President Obama, working with the Department of Justice, came up with a set of rules, because you can't simply tell a bunch of prosecutors everything your life's work was wrong. Okay, you can't simply tell them that, because they don't believe that what they were doing was in fact wrong, and so you want them at the table to help to define what it is that can be done to right this ship. Okay. One more minute. We also had tons of people in the White House who were working on this. We had so many bodies working on this effort that had never worked on this stuff before. It was incredibly important. So, of course, I have to mention Kathy Remler from White House Counsel's Office, who was the leader of getting this movement started. I have to mention Sally Yates and Eric Holder, who did unbelievable work from the Department of Justice side. Okay. I was working on the back end more so than the front end, and the whole idea that when people get out, they have to get some kind of help. So we were working with Michael Romano from the Three Strikes Project in California to give people help so that they could be successful. And the bottom line is what President Obama was trying to do was to set up something that people could carry forward to keep digging in and keep getting people out sooner, getting them back to their families, getting them out of the prison system. So I honestly, and remember the criticism we got for every single person we let out. Everything we did, we were getting criticized from the right for every single time that we were letting someone out. It was a different world we were living in. Had we known that the president could simply say whatever he wanted to say whenever he wanted to say it and let out whomever he wanted to let out, maybe we would have treated it differently. But that was not the world that we were living in the time that we were in office. So I think we got it right. Obviously, there could have been improvements, but I'm actually pretty proud of what we did. I think we did the best we could given what we had.
Okay, great. Thank you so very much, Roy. So I want to turn now to Rachel. Rachel, Roy was an insider, okay, in the Obama administration, while you co-founded a project that filed petitions from the outside. Tell us about it from your perspective. What went right, what went wrong? I mean, it's all hunky
All right.
dory. Movement, talk to us.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for having me here. And I hate being the person who, you give them free cookies and you're like, oh, but there weren't enough chocolate chips in those cookies. But that's probably how my comments are going to sound here, because I think there were a lot of lost opportunities, and I'm going to focus on two with the Obama initiative, because I think it's really important that we be critical going forward to think about what we might want to advise future presidents to learn from some mistakes. So the first one is not reaching all the people who deserved it. And I think here the critical mistake that the Obama administration made was that they limited clemency for people who could show that they likely would have received a substantially lower sentence if they were convicted of the offense today. So what that meant was you had to show there was a change in law and you would have been sentenced differently, as opposed to showing, for example, the law didn't change, but the prosecutor overcharged you. They just hit you hard, and we know there are laws on the books that haven't changed, but that result in unjust sentences for people. And I only have 5 minutes, so I can't give you the whole laundry list, but I'm just going to name a few things that do this. One would be what are called 924C charges, where you could have somebody who uses or carries a firearm in relation to a drug offense. The first time they do it, they get a 5-year mandatory minimum. Then they get 25 years for the next one, and so on. And so you have people who never were convicted before getting these stacked upon them. So they're looking at 30-year sentences, 55-year sentences. That law hasn't changed, but I think there are unjust results in those cases. Doubling people's mandatory minimums for prior felony convictions under 851. Again, no change in the law, but there's a problem with those cases. And this rule that said we were looking at only people who had sentences where they'd be sentenced differently today, that meant all those people just didn't get a look. And so I think the result of that is that the initiative missed a ton of people who deserved and should have gotten clemency, and that the clemency power is for. I mean, we know when the framers set it up, they had in mind a check against overzealous prosecutions. And while I respect the idea of having DOJ have an input, there is no way that DOJ should be in charge of this process, because it is uncomfortable to ask a prosecutor to question their life's work. They're just not the entity that should be doing this. They're not unbiased, and it's for precisely that reason that you need someone else to do it. And that brings me to the other really big flaw with the initiative, which was not questioning the role of the department in all this and thinking about what it should have done. So to give you a sense of the numbers from a slightly different perspective than how it compared to prior administrations, because I actually don't think that's the right comparison, because I think prior administrations were pretty awful. So instead, I think we'd want to know, first of all, how many people who met the administration's stated criteria actually got clemency. All right, now remember, those are criteria that I think were too narrow in the first place. But at a minimum, you would think it should reach all the people who met those criteria. And what we know is conservatively estimated by the Sentencing Commission, there were 2,687 people who met all the criteria that the Obama administration had set out. 92 of those people got clemency. That's 3.4%. Okay, so that I think is a flaw. So we have to ask why. Why were there so few grants? And here it's the process that I want to highlight as that second major problem, which is having the department in control of this. It just defies everything we know about human cognition to ask somebody who's already made a decision to review it again and not be biased or defensive about it. I think that we have examples. Ms. Johnson is a perfect case in point. How is that a denial? How could you think of that case as being denied? And I think when you look at it, you have to say there's something wrong with the process that produces that outcome the first time. We have other cases that our clemency pop-up had clients where you similarly look at the case, and I know I don't have time to tell you about them now, but I'll tell you afterwards if you'd like to know who some of those people are, who were denied, and it's really inexplicable. And I think if anyone other than a prosecutor were evaluating the case, it would have been a grant instead of a denial. People with no disciplinary records in prison at all, like zero. Extraordinary rehabilitative efforts, serving out decades for drug cases where they had no violence involved in their case and played minor roles, denies. So I think the prosecution Department of Justice prosecutors being charged of this is the biggest flaw, but I do want to highlight another one, which is the multiple layers of bureaucracy that this process had in place. So you had to run the gauntlet. You had 5 layers of review, first of all, through this outside organization called CP14. That brought you into the Department of Justice in the White House counsel's office, where you have 6 more layers of review before it would ever make its way to the president. And at any one of those places, someone could just tell you no and kill positive recommendations. And we know, too, that was happening, that people were saying no. We know that the Deputy Attorney General was saying no in lots of these cases, and we know that because the pardon attorney at the time, Deborah Leff, told us so in her resignation letter, that she was saying grant, and then they were being told deny later. So these layers of process were a problem. The people who were reviewing them having a prosecutorial bias were a problem. And when you have this many layers of bureaucracy, that helps explain why 8,000 people never got a decision under the Obama initiative. Last thing I'll quickly say is about the CP14 process. And again, I'm complaining about the lack of the chocolate chips in the cookie, and I'm sorry, because these lawyers were dedicated and committed, and I'm so grateful for their pro bono work. But it is important to note that that process was not ideal. These were people who were not experts in this area, so bless their hearts, they were trying to learn and figure it all out. But just a few statistics to quickly give you an idea of what was going on there. 3,000 people signed up to help. Of those 3,000 people, 2,581 petitions were filed. So less than 1 petition per lawyer ultimately got filed. And of those petitions that were filed, 894 were granted. So you needed 3 CP14 lawyers to get 1 grant. The clemency pop-up that Mark Osler and I started, we had 6 lawyers working full-time and a post-law school graduate, so 7 people. We had 96 grants. Out of 7. Now, why the difference? Well, we had people who knew what they were doing because this is all they were doing on a full-time basis. They were 100% dedicated to clemency. And so you get economies of scale, you get expertise. You just can't hand this off to people as a side job. It's got to be something that people are doing. So although this is what was in the past, I think the takeaways for the future would be you got to expand who you're looking at to give clemency. You got to take it out of the Department of Justice. You have to remove all these procedural layers. And lastly, you need to have a dedicated group of people that focus on clemency and develop an expertise in it.
Thank you, Rachel. And I'm so very glad that we are taping this. It will be on the Justice Roundtable website, so you can go back and digest everything that's being said. So appreciate that. So I want to go and turn now to Jason Hernandez. Jason, you basically hit the jackpot. That's what they call the clemency lottery, okay? Tell us just how that came about. And in your view, what was like? Was it, for you or for others, successful, not successful, or what? Tell us about it.
Well, believe it or not, and not very long ago, there was a time when nobody knew what clemency meant, right? Nobody knew that the president had this extraordinary power to release people. There wasn't panel discussions like this. There wasn't talked about on TV. There wasn't rallies in front of the White House saying, what do we want? Clemency, right? When do we want it? Now. And there wasn't a time long ago. I lived in that time. I was serving life without parole, and to tell you that, you see laws passed, you see Supreme Court decisions come out that aren't rendered retroactive, like Booker and Fan, guidelines that come out that aren't made retroactive, and when these laws do pass, they always exclude one certain offender. And that is a person that is serving life without parole. Mm-hmm. And even those with nonviolent offenses, like myself, like William Underwood, and so many others, like Alice Marie Johnson, people that we couldn't get relief no matter what happened. And I used to even reach out to organizations. I used to reach out to citizen organizations to ask them, look, this is just not me. This is not by myself. There's other individuals serving life without parole who are pretty extraordinary people, right? We just made a bad decision, and I don't think we deserve to die in prison for it. And they would even tell me, Jason, you're just not going to get any relief. Anybody serving life without parole, they're not going to give you clemency. And to Roy Moore's said, I mean, President Barack Obama did something that is extraordinary. I'd be in there right now. I would be in there right now. I probably would die in there had it not been for President Barack Obama to grant me his compassion, his mercy. But you know, all of that changed on December 19th, 2013, when President Barack Obama let me out and 7 other individuals serving life without, 6 were serving life without parole, 2 were serving. All of us were minorities, 7 African Americans, 1 Latino, which was me. Majority of us had been in prison 15 to 20 years. And, you know, it just sent shockwaves throughout the criminal justice system. Through prison, it gave people hope, right? And with that, you know, President Barack Obama and I, you know, I can't thank the man enough, right? I love him like a father. But one of the things that he did, what presidents before him did as well, is that he granted clemency to people who he felt strong compassion for, people that he felt had been wronged by the system. He granted clemency to people who looked like him, right? 70% of the individuals that received clemency were African American. Over 80% were minorities. Prior to that, but that's no different than what presidents did before him. Every other president that we had granted clemency to people that looked like them, right? But not only that, it's not about what were the good or the bad parts about Obama's clemency initiative, because they kind of did what we pushed towards them. We pushed crack cocaine offenders towards the Obama administration to grant these individuals clemency, and there's no doubt in my mind that these were the individuals that were most unjust sentences of all. And even when I came out, I started doing clemency work for people, and I would not, if you called me, if you were a prisoner and you called me, or you had a loved one in prison and you called me, and if you did not have a loved one that was serving life without parole for crack cocaine, I was not helping you. I had this blank rule that if you didn't meet that criteria, I wasn't helping you. But then over time, I realized that everybody's entitled to compassion, not just myself, right? Everybody's entitled to compassion. And I think that when we go forward, that we have to, again, we can't consider everybody, but we do need to broaden it other than just specifically crack cocaine offenders, and especially those serving life without parole. And, you know, and even though I consider myself like a nerd and a geek when it comes to clemency, probably about 4 weeks ago, I learned a valuable lesson about clemency, and it was in probably one of the wildest places that you could think of, and it was at a jewelry store. They were having this convention, and this lady asked me, Jason, I want you to come speak to my employees. We're having a session on empathy, and I want you to come talk to them, tell them your story. And I said, ma'am, I just don't, I'm picturing this room, and I just don't see none of these individuals that I'm going to be talking to, any of them, any type of connection with prison or incarceration. I just don't feel comfortable with that. And I just don't see how clemency can play a part in helping your employees. And she said, Jason, there is no bigger example of the lack of empathy when it comes to our criminal justice system, when it comes to mass incarceration. But as well, there's no greater example of empathy than when it comes from clemency, where you have the most powerful man in the world, right, showing his grace, his forgiveness, his empathy towards individuals who we view as our lowest citizens, and those are people that are in prison. There is no greater act of empathy than when it comes to that, right? So,
Okay.
okay, and again, I know that, and again, like, and real quick, and I'm pretty sure everybody has heard this, but you know, Nelson Mandela says, if you want to judge a nation, walk inside of its prisons, right? You judge a nation not by how it treats its highest citizens, but its lowest citizens. We know how our nation would be viewed by our criminal justice system. But what if our nation was judged by our clemency process, starting from December 19th, 2013, up until the release of the beautiful, lovely Alice Marie Johnson, right? Our nation would be viewed as a more just, as a much more civil as a nation. And, you know, like Norman Brown told President Barack Obama, you know, you're just one man, you can't save the world, but let's try to save who we can. Right?
Thank you so very much, Jason, for that. And I remember another statement too, what President Obama asked at that lunch at Plus Boys and Poets with Kimber, you and Norman were, I'm not sure if anybody else here. You basically said your stories were not unique. There were many, many, many people just like you who were in prisons. And I think that It's the important thing to understand. Alice Marie Johnson is not unique. She's wonderful and unique, but there are many Alice Johnsons out there that the prison doors need to be opened up. Before I turn to Amy, I just want to remind everyone, you have note cards inside your folders. If you have a question for this particular panel, write it out real quick so that a volunteer can bring them up to me, because after Amy, we're going to entertain 1 or 2 questions and then move to our next panel. So if you have anything, then raise your hand so that they can collect your card. So Amy Pova, you received clemency from President Clinton. You have been active in, I mean, you know, I thought I was an Energizer Bunny, but I mean, you know, you energized, and you beat me being Energizer Bunny. But Amy, looking back, what do you see now as the Obama effort fades into memory and the Trump effort begins to take form?
Well, I'm going to probably mirror quite a few of the concerns that Rachel expressed, but I can personalize it a little bit, because in order to fix the future, we have to understand the past. And the Office of the Pardon Attorney's placement inside DOJ and it being hostage to DOJ is a big part of the problem. And I know this because of my own personal case. I was at the Clemency Project 2014 dinner kickoff in DC, Kimba, a lot of people were there, oops, excuse me, and someone walked up to me and the first sentence out of his mouth was, your case started a war in the pardon office. And, you know, and then he introduced himself to me. He said his name was Sam Morrison. He worked at the Office of Pardon Attorney for 13 years while my case was active. So I sat down with him and I was literally a sponge trying to soak up everything. In fact, I asked him if he could go to dinner the next night because I really wanted to sit down and understand this process. And he explained to me that Helen Bulwark, who was second in command, had my case and that she was determined to bury me. He said, you were not going anywhere. And, you know, it's so hard to not take things personally, but I was just like, why? And he said, well, because she was a former prosecutor who reveres the reputation of the fine institution of the Department of Justice. And some people feel that way. Thank God we have people like Mark Osler and Paul Larkin and some other people who are maybe not quite as thin-skinned, I guess, when it comes to those of us who have told our stories in the press. In the 90s, there was not much interest in our stories. Glamour magazine, of all publications, focused on the conspiracy law. Kimba was also in that, several of the other women. And that was kind of the first time where something broke out and explained the women are serving the time for what a significant other did. And that person, in my case, was free, had gone on with his life, and he was the kingpin. And, you know, if the Department of Justice is, has a knee-jerk reaction to people that they've prosecuted simply because we tell our stories, then maybe they need to change their policy, because we should have a right to be able to share our stories and to educate the public. But according to Sam, he said the more press you got and the more political support, which I got about 16 letters from politicians, 2 senators in Arkansas had already told my mother that we, you know, one of them was Dale Bumpers, was from my little bitty hometown. My mom played bridge with him before he ever became governor. And when she first approached him in the early phases of the Clinton administration, he was like, Nancy, he said, I'm sorry, but I voted for these laws. I support the mandatory minimums, and I just can't get involved. Politicians are not going to deep dive into your transcripts. They are not going to try to figure out, but he figured 24 years, as everyone has heard who's ever served time, there's got to be more to the story, right? Well, everything changed with that article because Senator Bumpers, Senator Pryor were absolutely incensed that the laws that they thought were being applied fairly were being flipped around. And they said, this was never our intent. We never meant for the low-hanging fruit to serve the time for what kingpins and and big, the big leaders of organizations were doing, and that they could plea bargain and get a year, 2 years, 5 years, or their freedom. And so they vowed to get involved, and Senator Pryor had somebody, Meredith Cabe, used to work with him. She was over at the White House. They tried to do everything properly. Nobody's going to call up the president and say, "Hey, will you do me a favor?" People who think that happens, it's unless it's for them. And so they went to the Roger Adams, the pardon attorney. They met with him. When they left, they could tell he could care less. He was just a blank page. He had no interest. It was just sort of like, okay, yeah. And so when they left, they realized they were in trouble. They decided to take my case directly to President Clinton, which, as with Alice and other people, we tend to have to leapfrog over this obstacle. And even Clinton, some people said, "Oh, well, you were pretty and whatever, that probably helped." He was in a lot of trouble. And frankly, it worked against me, because the last thing they wanted to do was let a woman out that lived in Arkansas that, the media would go, "Why her?" And so we weren't really making a lot of progress there too, but Senator Pryor spoke with somebody over at the White House. They had asked for my case over at the Office of the Pardon Attorney, and it was not forthcoming. Sam Morrison said, "You were denied. Helen Bulwark denied you. They did not want to send you in." Finally, there was a demand for my case. This is a problem, and I think it was a huge problem with the Obama administration, because they, I think, made it known that they were not going to allow anybody to bring cases directly to them. And here we are in the Trump administration. I have much more to say, but I realize my 5 minutes are already up.
I'm just gonna let you wrap it up.
Yeah, and I would like to say that I started the Can Do Foundation as a two-pronged mission: educate people about the conspiracy law, which is everyone in prison just about is in it for conspiracy, and advocate for those individuals who exercise their Sixth Amendment right to a trial, because let's face it, that's where you get bagged, or you didn't satisfy the prosecutor. You may have pled guilty, but you didn't help them convict people. And we have to do a microscopic look and help those people, particularly women. And thank you, Alice, because we're all here and energized today because, you were that person who has stormed the gates and has us all here talking about clemency today. And I think we have a huge opportunity because of your case, and I hope that the Trump administration does something historic.
Let's give it up for Amy Koval. And just before we entertain a couple of questions that I have up here, I'd like us all to just close our eyes and give a very brief moment of silence in honor of Miss Ramona Brandt, who received clemency. She also was serving a life without parole sentence, and she came home. She even had lunch with the president at Busboys and the Poets, but her time outside of prison bars was brief. We won't talk about the healthcare situation inside prison, but she passed on. So I just want to give a moment of silence in honor of Ramona Brandt. Okay, thank you. So I have 3 questions, and I'm just going to raise the questions. If anybody wants to respond, you can, or you might choose not to respond if you don't really have an answer for it. But on to the audience, I'm going to cite what the questions are. Okay, so one is there any way to ensure continuity between administrations so that a good program such as Obama's does not end when he leaves office? Another one, how do you use the Hughes versus U.S. Supreme Court decision toward clemency? Now, I'm not even quite sure exactly which case that is, so I'm just saying Hughes v. U.S. towards clemency, and someone else might. And then the last question, okay, multiple speakers criticize DOJ having a role, but is that worse than system now that is apparently without a process at all under Trump? So those are 3 questions. If anybody wants to respond to any one of them, fine, but I presented them, as a whole. Is there a response to any of those?
Go ahead.
Sorry, let me, just real quick, and part of this is just a response to Rachel, who I truly respect in everything that she says, I think is meant well. We cannot forget where we were. We were trying to also pass criminal justice legislation at the same moment, and we were threatened by multiple senators that they would never pass criminal justice legislation if we continued to keep getting people clemency the way we were doing. That was what we were dealing with, and I think that helps to explain kind of where we were. The criticism on the volunteers, I understood what you're trying to say there. Who else was going to file all these petitions? There was no funding stream. The government's money had been cut. We needed these people to be out there fighting for these individuals to pass these things along. And then as far as the process and the bureaucracy is concerned, I mean, the problem was we recognized that if we made a mistake, if we let out a single person who ended up committing a violent crime again, the whole system would have gone down. Like the entire system would have gone down. And you can see the ads running in your head right now, had a single person who was released by President Obama committed a violent crime immediately after. So to answer the question on DOJ's role and the bureaucracy, it was all put in place to tee this up for someone else to take it and run with it from where we had gotten to. But we could only move so far, so fast in the world that we were in. And so I accept the criticism. I'm not going to be thin-skinned about the criticism. I see many of the passionate advocates out here in the room who I spoke to many, many times. We wanted to do more. We tried to do more. But we couldn't and keep the program going. And the one thing I'd say is Mark and Rachel had a great idea about ways to move this out of the administration that I actually agreed with. You got to kind of get it out of the politics of it. Let some independent people be the ones who view this thing. We just never got there.
Okay, so thank you. So one more person who has any
I
response?
just quickly on that transition
that's
from
it.
administration to administration
Okay,
question.
okay, good.
It's just to say that I think that is the thing to think about is what structure have you left in place that your successor can take over. And I think this one was very much just for President Obama. You know, it was just DOJ did something that he ordered them to do. Whereas if you were to, for example, move this and put it into the White House office in a commission model with having an expert body advise, that would probably stick. And that would stick going forward. And that would be my advice.
Like everything
Okay.
else we did.
And I think that's going to be the subject of some other conversations. We go. Let's give our panel a big hand. Thank you. The next panel. This is Mark Holden, Dan Jones, Brittany, and Alex. So, yeah. Okay, okay, that's fine. So panel 2 is taking its stand. Okay, okay.
Right here, 5 minutes.
We're really looking Mark and Van and Brittany and Alex. You can stay where you want, but Mark and Van, yeah. It's okay, it's okay. No, you Mark.
Is he fine? Is he? Okay.
Yeah, but the order.
The order of the question.
Okay, great. Thank you so very much. Let's go on and get started here. Okay, so I'm gonna start with introductions, and I'm gonna start with Mark Holden. And actually, Mark, what impressed me most, and I mentioned this to you in the lobby, about you, Mark Holden, Senior Vice President and General Counsel of Koch Industries, was really your personal story as a young prison guard at a facility that housed some of your peers. And I consider you one of the epitomes of what Brian Stevenson always talks about, being proximate to an issue, which really led to your advocacy for reform. So Mark has worked with various Koch companies on a variety of litigation, regulatory, commercial, and compliance issues. Brittany Barnett. Brittany is the daughter of a formerly incarcerated mother and knows firsthand the impact that mass incarceration has on families and on communities. She is the co-author of the Buried Alive Project, and her dedication to this work has resulted in executive clemency for 7 of her clients, including Alice Marie Johnson. And Miss Alice Marie Johnson, oh my goodness, served 21 years of a prison sentence, life sentence without parole for a drug offense. To date, she is the only person with a drug sentence commuted by President Trump, and we all hope that that will change real soon. Okay. Facilitated through, I think, I'm not sure, Topeka Sam, Mike featured Alice in a video op-ed in October 2017 that caught the attention of Kim Kardashian, who successfully advocated for her release at the White House. And we also have none other than Van Jones, the president and the co-founder of hashtag Cup50. He's a CNN political commentator, the host of The Messy Truth and the Van Jones Show. One does not have to dig very deep to discover that just about every single mover and shaker organization out there, whether we're talking about the Dream Course or We Build a Dream or Dream for All or the Ella Baker Center or Color of Change, they all were organizations that he founded and helped to incubate. So thank you for joining us, Van. So I'm going to go on and start with our questions for our panel two. Mark, we have moved from a progressive to a conservative administration, yet there seems to be a consistent, interest in clemency. Tell us, what is the conservative argument for commuting sentences for people such as Ms. Alice Johnson?
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And it's been an honor to meet Ms. Johnson. So inspiring what she's gone through, and just really glad to be here. You know, I'll answer your question, but I think the key is if you look at the criminal justice reform issues and the movement, it's really probably, at least in my estimation, the only issue that both the left and the right work on together productively. And I think that's important, and I hope it can be a model for something else. It doesn't seem like it can be. But I think it's because we don't go to our corners and have our talking points and not listen to each other. At the end of the day, you know, we worked with the Obama administration, with Roy and with Valerie Jarrett on issues at Koch Industries we did on criminal justice reform, and we're working with the Trump administration. We've worked closely with Van and his organization, Cut50. You know, we've worked with the ACLU, we've worked with Heritage. It's across the board, and it's because these are fundamental liberty issues that we're talking about that everybody believes in, I think, by and large, regardless of your political beliefs or your ideology. And so when you have a situation like with Ms. Johnson, I mean, I think most people are going to say it is unjust for a woman like her who made a mistake, had a tragedy in her life, made a mistake, moved on, and then is sentenced to life in prison as a first-time nonviolent offender. It doesn't make any sense. It shocks the conscience. And so I think that's what brings these issues together, and it's not a right or left orientation. There are some issues that we kind of don't agree on or would treat differently. But at the end of the day, this is a fundamental liberty issue. And so if you believe in the rule of law, if you believe in proportionality, if you believe in the punishment fitting the crime, if you believe in, most importantly, in my opinion, in a lot of ways, redemption, second chances, you're going to be involved in this issue. You're going to be involved in clemency in particular. And I am really glad that President Trump did what he did for Ms. Johnson. That was a great thing. And I think there's more to come, quite frankly. And so that was good for him to do it, even better for the founders to put that in the Constitution, that the president can do that. Because when I hear all these stories about the Senate not wanting to do this, or if you do that, we're not going to do this, I always just come back to the same conclusion. It's really, really inconvenient and not good that we leave these big issues up to politicians, quite frankly. I really feel that way. So for us, looking at the way we are, at the world the way we do, and the criminal justice system, the Article 2 powers of the president, the pardon and commutations are very important. And so I was very excited when Ms. Johnson, her sentence was commuted, as I was a few years earlier when one of Mark Osler's clients, Weldon Angelo, wasn't commuted but was set free. And Weldon was also a first-time nonviolent drug offender who got 55 years under the gun stacking 924C laws. And so that was great. Weldon's a good guy. His life's moving on. Yeah, he's with his family. But the problem is, from a business perspective, and I work in a business, this is not, it's not sustainable and it's not scalable the way we're going about this, the whole issue, unless we do something different with the commutations. And what needs to happen, what has to happen, are fundamental changes to all aspects of our criminal justice system, especially our sentencing laws. It's pretty simple. That's right. I mean, we're basically still working with a system that was passed when I was starting to work in the prison in the 1980s, with these long sentences, these punitive punishments, extremely punitive punishments, even for low-level nonviolent drug offenders. And we haven't changed. We haven't changed the script at the federal level. And you can probably say, okay, well, we didn't know, but we do know now. And so when you know better, you need to do better. And what we've learned from the states is that we don't need to lock people up for long periods of time, particularly nonviolent offenders. We can divert them. We can look at whatever issues besides, whether it's a mental health issue, whether it's a poverty issue, whatever it is, there's a way to divert people out of the systems. There are ways to rehabilitate people so when they come out, they're less violent, they're less troubled, and they're much more productive. And so from our perspective, what needs to happen is this needs to be scaled up. And we need to have these comprehensive criminal justice reforms occur. And they need to happen for real justice to happen. Because for Alice Johnson and Weldon Angelos and others, that's great. But there's thousands of other people, like Chris Young for one, Matthew Charles for another, and there are probably several others who need justice and who need a path forward. And so we're going to fight for all these reforms, but particularly for the criminal justice reforms going forward. One last thing I want to just say, I'm going to close it up, because this is all, in my opinion, about redemption. And I think what Ms. Johnson's doing, what she did when she was in prison, when she probably felt like she had no hope, she became an ordained minister. That's right. It's amazing. I don't think I could ever do something like that. And then when she comes out, she's going to help people now who are in the same circumstance she found herself in a couple of months ago. That's what this is all about. And as I always say, we need an act of Congress to change a lot of these things, but acts of consciousness by all citizens working together is what's going to change this ultimately and change our criminal justice system.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to go to Van Jones. Right now, Van, a commentator, and activist on clemency and a lot of things. Did you see hope in this moment? And if so, why?
I do. First, let me just ask a question. How many people in here are parents, have kids? Anybody, any parents? Anybody here have twins? Anybody got a set of twins? Twins. I'm a twin. You know something that most people don't know. If you have twins, it sucks. And it sucks not for the obvious reason. It's not just you have twice as many diapers to change, twice as much food to buy. The problem is, if you have one twin that's healthy, doesn't matter how healthy that twin is, if the other one gets sick, they're both sick. Right. As with twins, so with a two-party system. If you have one party that gets sick on an issue, both parties ultimately wind up impaired. The Republican Party, staying reasonably healthy on criminal justice, is, in the age of Trump, is key for the Democrats to stay where they are. I know this because I spent 25 years working on criminal justice, and when I was in California, we had to fight the Democrats. They built 20 prisons and one university in 22 years. Democrats, Jerry Brown, Willie Brown, all the liberals everybody loves. We're building prisons to try to impress Republican voters. And Willie Horton chased Democrats off of a cliff for 20 years. We had a bipartisan consensus for mass incarceration. Both parties had a consensus for mass incarceration. To get out of it, you got to have a stable bipartisan consensus to undo it. Right. And we were staring down a barrel when President Trump came into office. He ran against the reformers in his own party on prisons. There were Republicans in his party who were where Mr. Holden is and others. And he ran against them and won. So So I was hopeless on election night because I thought you're going to have a Republican Party that was going to be a Willie Horton party, that they were all going to have to line up behind Trump, and the Democrats were going to abandon us. We were going to be in deep doo-doo. And yet, that's not exactly where we are. There was an aggressive effort to engage this administration to try to make sure that they didn't go on criminal justice where they went on immigration. They didn't go on criminal justice where they went on Muslims. And that effort is paying off. And a key to that effort has been this fight around clemency, this engagement with President Trump on the question of clemency, and engaging him as somebody who himself feels that perhaps he is being unfairly prosecuted or persecuted. And that has opened a window to have a conversation. I want to say a couple things before we hear from the real champions who we follow behind your leadership, Brittany, through most of these fights. We can't be neutral in a fight inside the Republican Party between pro-incarceration forces like Jeff Sessions, pro-incarceration forces like Cotton, pro-incarceration forces like Donald Trump on his worst day. When there are other people in that party and other people inside that building who are trying to push the other way. Jared Kushner's father went to prison. And so Jared Kushner hates prisons and is trying to do something about it. I say about Jared Kushner all the time, we got 99 conflicts, but prisons ain't one. Prisons ain't one. We agree on that. And on these issues where people's lives are on the line, on these issues where people are suffering, I've never had a single federal prisoner, a single person behind bars in a federal prison say, I want to get out of here, what's happening is terrible. But whatever you do, don't talk to any Republicans. Whatever you do, don't go to the White House and fight for me. I've never heard that. I'll hear it from outside of those particular constituents. And so I think that there is hope because we've been able to, and I just want to point out, why is there hope? We do have a process now underway, a fight inside that administration to do something better on clemency. That is a direct result of the incredible work that's done by people up here to get Miss Alice Johnson out. Do not underestimate the impact of this president taking the step to get one person out and getting positive feedback. He took one step, he got positive feedback. And so he has said, and in closing about hope, he has said that he wants NFL players to suggest other people to come home. Now, that's a remarkable development. He's had nothing positive about NFL players the whole time he's been there, called him everything but a child of God. But some magic jumped on him. And he literally ran out the White House talking about, I want to do more. And the NFL players should tell me who to help. Now, I will say that when you didn't get out, I've never seen so many people upset. This one. I said, Brittany, you got 800,000 people out. She said, but Miss Alice. We were destroyed. But it was a plan.
It was definitely a plan.
Because the sky being so black, we needed a North Star. And we have one. And I think if we keep following what we're doing, keep engaging, keep putting real people forward, we can have our political differences, but keep putting real people forward, I think we'll get more hope and more hope and more hope. That's what I believe.
Thank you, Sam. North Star, I like that. So we're gonna go to North Star's attorney right now. Brittany Barnett. Brittany, you represented Miss Alice and successfully represented other clemency recipients in the past, one of which I had the honor to meet, Sharonda Jones. So can you just describe your work with Miss Alice in terms of her freedom and what her freedom might mean for others?
Yes. First, if Sharonda is watching this, happy birthday. And with Alice, I think, and what I hope to represent is we need advocates for criminal justice reform, but we also have to have attorneys. And I feel that certain groups take the blame for mass incarceration, from law enforcement to different political parties. And I truly believe that there is a failure of American lawyers, and that is a large part of why we're here. And so what the role that I have with my colleagues, my sister, my angel Cody, who spoke earlier, is showing the power of attorneys to really reform the system. We hold a monopoly to the court system. And I think once we have lawyers standing in mass, ready to tackle these issues, no matter what type of law they practice, that we can really make a difference. And that is what happened in the case of Alice Johnson, that we had a team of lawyers, in addition to numerous advocates, raising awareness for this issue, but really showing what can happen when we all come together. And one of the things that with lawyers, I know for me, I can only speak for myself, and I know my sister, my angel as well, but we develop relationships with our clients that is above and beyond typical legal representation. My mom was in prison, my mama. And to think about Miss Alice being someone's mom, serving life without parole, I don't even know that people, even people in this room, if they stop and really think of life without parole, how long that is. That's forever. And we throw around these 15-year, 20-year sentences like we're talking about 15 cents, 20 cents. That's a long time. And I think that we need to feel that. And that is what I do, being a zealous advocate for my clients. I don't care who is in the White House. My clients are in prison. And I think I feel it. And I felt it. And for Alice, for Sharonda Jones, for Chris Young, for William Underwood, all the others that are serving life, we feel it. And you have to feel it to be that advocate and that voice. And we're literally, walking through the valley of a shadow of death. And there's just no doubt about it. And I think once people actually feel it, get proximate, that it'll make a difference. And with Alice's case, the great part about it, and there was a lot of, people from all over that was attacking the Kim Kardashian aspect of it. But for me, Kim Kardashian saw a video that Alice did. Alice told her own story. She took control of her own narrative. And Kim was not only moved to tears, she was moved to action. And I honestly just don't see what is wrong with that. I think the people that feel there's something wrong with that are the people that feel that there's something wrong with that are the ones that's blinded by the spotlight. They're so blinded by Kim Kardashian's spotlight that they fail to look beyond that light to see a 63-year-old great-grandmother waking up every single day said to never, ever, ever be free. And so when we look beyond the spotlight, get to the heart, the heartbeat of the issue, what Miss Alice's case is doing, the light that's surrounding her now, is shining a light on so many people that are buried alive by this system. And the hope that I see, just being, speaking with you every day, and the hope that I feel from others that are buried alive by this system, it is a very unique time, and there is a unique opportunity for this administration to really use Ms. Johnson's case to free the masses.
So, thank you, Brittany. So, Miss Alice, you've been characterized as the light and, the North Star. And I wanted to say initially, welcome to freedom. But then I just remember there's a whole slew and set of other things that happens once you get out. And so I'm just going to say welcome to the world outside of secure confinement, shall we say. All the other issues done with reentry, that's subject for another day, but we are really glad that you're on this side of the fence, shall we say. So in prison, as was stated before, you became an ordained minister, you wrote countless plays and skits. You were privileged to avail yourself of many programmatic opportunities that were available, even allowed to Skype out of your institution to the world at large. You're now a great grandmother, a great grandmother, right? Yes. Okay, What does the future hold for us? What do you have to say to folk in this room? Talk to us.
I want to say it's a great day to be free. Every day that I wake up, I don't forget where I came from. And I can never forget the ones who have been left behind. As it has been said, who are just like me. I'm not unique in my situation of how harshly I was penalized as a first-time nonviolent offender. When I left prison, I left a letter behind for the women who were still there to give them hope. They don't have maybe the voices, they don't have the same miracle that I had in Kim Kardashian seeing at that moment that she was on Twitter. And she knows that it was divine intervention herself because she had not been on Twitter that day when my face popped up on her phone. For those who don't have someone who saw them, I'm that person who will continue to magnify their faces, magnify their voices, and as I told them, they've been tattooed on my heart, and that tattoo cannot be covered up. So I'm so thankful to be on this panel today. I've been running, as I said, since the day that I ran across that street. When I came into prison, my hands were down. I was handcuffed. I came out, my hands were up, not only running into freedom to my family, but running into a brand new life of a second chance in life. And that's something that, unless you have lain in a bed like I laid in and walked in my shoes, you could not possibly understand that place of darkness that you go into, that if you don't have faith, and it is my faith that kept me alive and brought me out of prison, never having to be on psychological medication. But my psychological medication was the word of God. This is not a fake thing for me. It's not jailhouse religion. It is the only way that I could have made it. Looking at the women that I saw in prison who had no hope, even in prison, I can tell you that God used me as an agent of hope and as an agent of change in prison to bring light into darkness and to show women what they could do and that they could make a change in their life and they could, even in prison, not allow prison to do them. Time is a gift from God, and it is so important what you do with that time. So I know many people mourn those years that I was away. My family mourned those years. I mourn the separation, but I don't mourn it in the sense that my life was useless or that I had no impact. It's something about serving others. It blesses them, but it blesses the person who is serving them even more because it gave me not just an understanding of where they were coming for, but I could feel, it gave me a feeling of the pain that they were experiencing, pain that I am very much familiar with. And it got me out of that place of my own pain to reach out and help somebody else and feel them and to lift them up. And in the process, I was lifted up too. I was blessed to be able to use what God had gifted me with, even outside of prison. I wrote for outside women's conferences, and I received so many letters from women who were free, who said from the things that I wrote to encourage them at women's conferences, that it made them not take life for granted, and to say if that woman can continue to praise God where she's at, surely there's something we should be doing on the outside. So those were opportunities that I had, and I don't, as I said, I don't take freedom lightly because this is a gift that I have received. It's a miracle. I was talking to Van earlier, and I told him it just popped out of my head, but it's the truth because I tried to speak from my heart. I don't have a prepared speech. I may not have the most flowing and fancy words, but what you hear from me is straight from my heart. I don't feel that I was denied or delayed. I was destined for this. I believe the Lord has raised up my voice for such a time as this, that this is the moment that He called me into to speak out, to be not just a number, to not just be someone that they read about, but that I'm a human being, to humanize this issue. It's not just a social issue, it's a humanity issue. It's an issue that should prick the conscience of every American citizen that sees what happened to me, to know that but for the grace of God, I could have been them and they could have been me. Because a mistake in your life, a mistake on your worst day, you think about something you may have done that you were not particularly proud of, and how that could have taken your life away from you. You're told that no matter what you do, that you are not worthy of redemption. That if you've made a mistake, we're here at this university, so I'm speaking to the students now. You imagine in your life that in your first semester you failed a subject. You pick yourself up and you had a change of mind and a change of heart, and you do everything right for the next 3 semesters and you make straight A's. But at the end of the year, you receive a failing grade because they tell you that only what you did the first semester counts. That's what life without the possibility of parole tells you. So I'm thankful to be a face of hope, not only for prisoners, but a face of hope for those who are free yet in prison. So I thank you again for having me here today. May God bless you and may you continue the fight.
Oh, my goodness. Miss Alice, you are indeed destiny. So let's give all of our panel a hand. We're going to bring up the third panel. I think we're going to just go right into the third panel and, yeah, so. Okay, again, thank you so very much. Wow, you have so many quotable moments here. Okay, so can our third panel come on up?
Thank you.
I want to remind everyone that the hashtag is clemency. It's justice. Where'd it go? Okay, well, the hashtag is clemency is justice. Okay, wow. And we will have a few minutes for those who are able to go into the lounge afterwards and have some cookies and to talk and network and photo ops and the like. So we're going to go into our last panel, and I'm going to give my brief introductions, and I'm going to start with Mark Osler right here, because Mark, we've really kind of grown close over the past several years working on issues of clemency, but I don't think you know about this. I first knew about you years and years ago when the Justice Roundtable brought the Sam Goldwyn film called American Violet to Washington, along with the director and the woman that the film was based on. And lo and behold, the character of the professor in that film was you. I didn't know who you were at the time, but that's who it was. So Mark Osler is professor of law at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota, one of the most consistent writers on the issue of clemency. He's a former federal prosecutor who won the Supreme Court Spears versus U.S. case, which struck down the mandatory 1:1 ratio between crack and powder cocaine in the sentencing guidelines. He lectures around the country critiquing the death penalty through the lens of the Jesus trial. Paul Larkin, I'm so very glad that you were able to join us today. Paul is a senior legal research fellow at the Heritage Foundation. He served as assistant to the Solicitor General at the Department of Justice, as counsel to the Senate Judiciary under the chairmanship of Orrin Hatch. He has also been quite active on issues of clemency, and he's authored numerous articles on the issue. So thank you for joining us. And we have Ebony Underwood. And, I don't think that I've seen anyone who has gained as much expertise, growth, and development in such a short period of time as my dear sister here, sister in the struggle, Ebony Underwood. Ebony is the founder now for organization We Got Us Now that advocates on behalf of children of incarcerated parents, of which she has one. She was traumatized as a youth by her father's mandatory sentence of life without parole. And 4 years ago, just a slight 4 years ago, she found her own voice and started sharing her story through film and advocacy. And she also spearheaded the Google-initiated Love Letters campaign to demonstrate the unbreakable bond between a child and their incarcerated parent on Father's and Mother's Days. And then last but absolutely and completely not least, my path first crossed Andrea James after I read her book, Upper Bunkies Unite and Other Thoughts on the Politics of Mass Incarceration. She's a former criminal defense lawyer, a formerly incarcerated woman, a recipient of the 2016 Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award, and she is founder and executive director of the National Council of Incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women and girls. Raise your hands. I see you all there in the t-shirts there. And you know, when I first heard the name, I thought, oh my God, that's such a long title, but I can just shoot up National Council of Incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women. I mean, it just kind of rolls off the tongue there, you know what I'm saying? So thank you, Andrea, for joining. So let's go on and get right to it. So Mark, okay, you heard the first panel.
I
And,
did.
You know, you heard the second panel. Can we do anything to make the clemency system better? And if so, what's your recommendation?
Yeah, we can and we must. You know, one of the things, just to reflect back on what Mark Holden said, why do we have broad agreement on this? It's because two of the most American values, freedom and mercy, are at the heart of it. And the Constitution is constructed to maintain freedom. And we can't ignore the fact that the framers of the Constitution put in the middle of that document the pardon power, which is about mercy. And it must be used because it is a value that has been given to us across the generations. And it has to fit the moment we're in right now. And the way that clemency is constructed does not serve what we need right now to achieve that value. Right now, the system that's in place, the formal system to review clemency, where there are, I believe, over 10,000 petitions pending right now, it goes this way. You submit the petition. It goes to the staff of the Office of the Pardon Attorney, and then to the Pardon Attorney, and then to the staff of the Deputy Attorney General, and then to the Deputy Attorney General. And then it goes to the staff of the White House Counsel. And then it goes to the White House Counsel. And then it goes to the President. And we wonder what's going wrong. There is a lot wrong with that process that we need to remedy. First of all, it's overly bureaucratic. There are so many hands on everything and such an incentive on each one of them to say no, that what happens is that people say no. The next thing that is wrong is it is vertical, that these get passed up the line, and any one of these players is analyzing it at that time. Not everybody. It's not horizontal where you have people talking to one another about it, but rather it's a series of vertical decisions. The third thing is that many of the people involved in this, particularly the Deputy Attorney General and the White House Counsel, are generalists. That is, they have a lot of other things to do. They are not people that specialize in this. Rachel Barco earlier talked about how when we hired lawyers to work just on clemency, how efficient that was, how good they got at it, and why that mattered. Having someone like the Deputy Attorney General at the center of this process is a problem. And that brings me to the fourth essential problem, and that is the conflict that we have with the Department of Justice, and particularly the Deputy Attorney General, having control over this process, because that's the person who is in charge of all of the U.S. attorneys. I'm a former federal prosecutor myself, and my boss reported to the Deputy Attorney General. And that means that there's going to be an undue amount of influence by who do have a very strong reason not to want clemency to happen, despite that value being at the center of our. What's the solution? I believe strongly that the best model that we can have is one that involves a board or a commission that will consider these things in a horizontal way, that will talk to one another, and they'll be much more efficient. When we look at the states, 45 of the 50 states use a commission or a board of some form. That should tell us something. Not a single state has anything that in any way resembles the way the federal system works, where it goes through the prosecutors, where you have this vertical structure. It should tell us something as well, that no state has adopted the model that the federal system uses. Now, if we had a commission or a board, it would allow for all kinds of diversity to be represented in the way that these things are considered. It would allow for that collaboration and discourse before the decisions are made, and it would avoid the politicization that's inherent in many other models where you have a political actor who would be making the decision or making the recommendation. Just to finish here, I think we've all been really moved by Alice Johnson today and what she embodies, what she means for that value of mercy. And I'd like to point something out. When I say mercy, I don't mean that she didn't earn it. We need to recognize many of the people who are here who got clemency, and I'm looking out at them right now, who I know their stories and I know they earned it very much, but not relative to what the state believes, because the state has a sentence. And that's what the number is that they're looking at, or it's not even a number if it's life. But we have to recognize that this is not just within our own Constitution. It goes back to ancient times. As a Christian, I know that the center of my faith is a story that includes clemency, that Jesus was put before the crowd, and they got to decide clemency. And there was politics in play there, certainly. Even within the Roman Empire, they had a goddess of clemency, Clementia. And right here, I've shown many people this before. This is a coin that bears the name of the goddess Clementia. And we have goddesses of clemency here. Miss Alice, I told you I had something for you. And it's this 1,700-year-old coin, because you are a goddess of clemency. And we're blessed to have you amongst us.
Thank you so very much, Mark Osler. Got another title, Goddess of Clemency. Okay, so Paul Larkin, we heard Mark Osler. I know you heard the first panel talking about the issue dealing with Department of Justice. I'm just curious, do you feel it's important that clemency be taken out of the Department of Justice? And if so, what are your recommendations as to what it should look like?
It is very important, and it's very important for two reasons. One is it gets rid of some of the problems we now have, and second, it allows the president to be bold in ways that he can't right now. For example, what we have now is a situation where the Department of Justice has a monopoly over the management of the clemency process. And yet, at the same time, the Department of Justice as a whole suffers from an apparent or actual institutional conflict of interest. Read the pardon clause of Article 2. The president can grant relief only for federal offenses. What does that mean? That means the Justice Department has prosecuted everyone who comes forward for clemency. Okay? People being people is going to be difficult, as my colleague Rachel Barkhouse said earlier, for people to be willing to second guess their own judgment. Okay? We've heard about the thin blue line for police officers. Well, guess what? Prosecutors have it too. They're not going to be interested in saying that other prosecutors got things wrong. Now, when you consider that the Deputy Attorney General is at the apex of the Justice Department system under current regs, you still have the same problem. As my colleague Mark pointed out, the Deputy Attorney General was responsible for managing all the criminal litigation conducted by the U.S. Attorney's offices and all the divisions at the Justice Department. How likely is it that that person is therefore going to be willing to second guess the judgment of a colleague, that maybe this person was innocent, that maybe the person shouldn't have been charged, notwithstanding the fact there was ample evidence of proof, that maybe the sentence is excessive, or that maybe for reasons that have occurred perhaps entirely while in custody or after release, the person, even though guilty and properly convicted, should nonetheless be forgiven. It's difficult for someone who is in the position of supervising other prosecutors to say, no, you have to continue on with whatever your sentence is, whatever your conviction is for that sort of reason. Moving out of the Justice Department helps avoid that problem. Now, as I said before, you've heard go big or go home, right? There's two ways of doing it then. You can move it out of the Justice Department and create a separate commission, somewhat similar to the United States Sentencing Commission that we now have and that Rachel, my good friend, is a member of. Okay, that's one option. And there are certain pluses and minuses to that. You heard Mark mention some of them. One is that you get greater diversity in the number of people you can appoint. One is that, as a practical matter, we all know this matters, A commission like that gives the president political cover in case someone who gets released does something wrong in the future, okay? It also allows more people to participate in the process, and it gives the president, let's face it, additional opportunities for patronage, something that every president loves to have. But there are problems with that approach. One is, unfortunately, that people who get appointed to those positions could use their platform as members of the U.S. Clemency Commission to recommend a very large number of people for clemency, even though they're not responsible for anything that happens afterwards. Keep in mind, the Sentencing Commission was under the constraint that all of the sentencing guidelines had to be consistent with federal statutes. You couldn't disagree in any way with the statutes. You can as a member of the Clemency Board, so you have the risk, therefore, that politics will enter into the process, okay? There's another option, and that is if you want to, rather than outsource this, you can bring it in-house. What you would do is establish an Office of Executive Clemency in the Executive Office of the President. And I think the best person to head up that is the Vice President. Why? The Vice President is a constitutional officer, just like the President, serves the same 4-year term. So he has the stature to disagree with the Justice Department and the Attorney General, as well as any other official or member of the private sector, such as the President of the American Bar Association. Okay. Secondly, he has the best possible access. He has a West Wing office. He can just walk down to the president's office. Okay? In theory, let's face it, the president trusts his judgment because he appointed him his running mate. This isn't the 19th century anymore where the party picks running mates. The president candidate picks the running mate. So there are a lot of factors that militate in favor of having the vice president do this job. Now, granted, are there downsides? You betcha. There's a risk, it'll be said to be further politicization of the office. After all, now you got the president and the vice president, who are both not only constitutional officers, but political figures making this call. There's a risk that if they disagree, it creates problems. Yes, there are costs and benefits to each option, but at least what I think we probably will find is that any debate over which of these two we should pursue will advance the ball further than just leaving the status where it is today. Why? One last thing. It might allow the president to actually be a little more aggressive, if you will, in how he does things. I disagreed not with the goal President Obama had for his clemency and about it. Rather than trying to administer justice on an even-handed basis, on a case-by-case basis at a retail level, I think what he should have done is just issue executive order, one pardon warrant, in which he said everyone who was convicted under the 1986 Drug Act, who couldn't take advantage of the 2010 Fair Sentencing Act, has his sentence or her sentence reduced to whatever it would have been under the 2010 Act. Okay? Well, not exactly. There's what you then do is you then send it back to the district courts. Let them decide what the sentence be. Why? District courts are better at sentencing than presidents. Let's face it. We don't elect presidents to make sentencing decisions. We elect presidents to make decisions at a very large basis rather than do it in individual cases. District courts do this all the time. They are much better at this. But if you reduce the sentence to the maximum it could have been under the 2010 Act, which reduced the ratio from 100 to 1 to 18 to 1, you're at least giving everybody a chance to make his or her best case to a decision maker that otherwise is constrained by a written statute. So what we have, if we move it out of DOJ, is the opportunity to boldly go where no president has gone before, and to do so in a way that increases the likelihood of just sentences. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, so I'm going to really continue along your line with my question to Ebony Underwood. Ebony, some people have proposed groups of people who to be closely considered for clemency. Then NFL players, for example, suggested looking at prisoners over 60. Do you think something like that is a good idea? And if so, how would that affect you?
I think that's absolutely a good idea. My father is 64 years old. He said during President Obama's term, when they were doing the clemencies, that so many elderly prisoners were fighting for relief and, just had no hope.
and, really, really excited about the whole clemency initiative, including myself. I was like extremely excited about the clemency initiative because I'm like, this is the highest office of government saying that we want to reform the criminal justice system. A large reason why I never spoke out about being a daughter with an incarcerated father is because of the shame, the stigma. I know who my dad is, but a lot of people don't, if you look at the sentence and assume this life without parole sentence, that he must be this hardened criminal. And he had always been a father from the moment that he left and was taken away from us. He's always remained a father and has never stopped being a father. So when I heard that the president said that he wanted to reform the criminal justice system, I was so moved to actually say something and do something because my father never stopped being a dad, and he had been fighting vigorously for those 25 years. He had been fighting so much, from Booker to Apprendi to all these cases, and I only know them because he shared them with me. I was oblivious to all of this stuff. And then none of those cases being able to be applicable to him. So, I've literally seen my father from 33 years old to now 65 years old. It's a long time. He's been there, he was arrested 3 days before his birthday. He turned 34, he's 64, he'll be in December of this year, he'll be 65. It's a long time, it's 30 years. So for the NFL players to make a stance and say, you know what, this is what we would recommend, absolutely. I think that's incredible for them to actually, it seems like they did their homework. They didn't just, come out and say that we want to do this. They actually made a stance and said, these are some of the reforms you should take into consideration. Seeing Miss Alice Johnson coming home, running across the street, literally sent chills through my body because, if I can just explain and express to you all, and a lot of people in this room, Andrea knows well, me, my brother who's here, my sister, my younger siblings, my sister and my younger brother who did not want to speak out because of the shame and the stigma that they had coped with for so many years. But we all formed together and said, you know what, we're gonna fight for our dad. And during the Obama administration, literally fighting for our dad, then to literally get denied the week after Thanksgiving, again, in the sun. Like, Christmas is the worst holiday for me ever because my father was arrested right before Christmas. So literally to get denied after Thanksgiving, after we were here in DC fighting, all of us collectively, I was devastated, absolutely devastated, and was like, what the hell am I doing this for? I've literally dedicated my life at that point, I had literally dedicated my life to this work in the hopes that, you know what, all this advocacy, all this movement, children of incarcerated, I had never even heard of children of incarcerated parents until I heard that there was an initiative that the Obama White House had for it. And and to now be at the forefront with so many families, Miss Alice Johnson's families, Michelle West's daughter, McQuell West, so many families, us fighting, and to just be denied is heartbreaking. There was a question asked by my dear friend Bella Boz about, like, how do you help the families? And the families are wounded. We're wounded in this. We all need to really heal. It's really, I started speaking out in this journey, and I thought it was me. I thought I was alone. I barely talked to my siblings about this. When I started to speak out, and I encountered so many young people from all walks of life. It's not just brown and black people, people from all walks of life. Wealthy, poor people, everybody is affected by incarceration. We need to bring our families home. We need to keep families connected. We need to bring our elders home. My siblings and I were rejuvenated by Miss Alice Johnson, and we started a campaign called #FreeWilliamUnderwood. We started a website, freewilliamunderwood.com, because she was our beacon of hope after all the lost hope that we had from the previous administration. You're just devastated. I saw McQuell West at a Google summit in California, literally running off the stage because she felt used. She's like, I poured my heart, I put my heart on my sleeve, and I feel used. Like, what happened? My mother is still there. Michelle West is still there. This is a system of second chances. This is a system of corrections. At what point are we correcting if we're incarcerating people for life without parole? Where is the point of correction? If this is a correctional system, where is the corrections? Where is the opportunity for second chances?
Okay. Thank you very much, Ebony. Where is the connection? We need many more forums like this. Many more. I know a lot of different tangents that this could go on that are really, really, really critical to answering some of those questions that Roy said was the concern of the previous administration. We have answers for all that. What danger is Alice? Alice Walker, Alice Johnson. What danger is William Underwood today? What danger is Michelle West? I mean, I'm just saying. You know what I'm saying? People, what does redemption actually mean? Okay, so anyway, let's bring it on home now. We have Andrea. Andrea, many of the most deserving clemency recipients, they have something in common. Yes, indeed. Many of them were convicted of conspiracy to distribute narcotics. Just want to hear your perspective. Is that a good focus group for clemency as well? Those who were convicted of conspiracy.
Yes, and it's something that at the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, we're focusing on because but for conspiracy and the wide net that it casts, many of the women who are currently in federal prison serving these protracted drug sentences would not be serving those sentences, would not be in prison, but for conspiracy. And we're working with Equal Justice Under Law right now about this very issue to challenge the use, to raise public awareness about the use of conspiracy. I was a former criminal defense attorney who was in prison, and I walked into a prison crammed full of women who, but for conspiracy and the mandatory, they could not have been convicted of mandatory minimum sentence and sentenced under a mandatory minimum, but for being charged under conspiracy. And so it just casts such a wide net. And, you know, I want to point out, you know, a lot of people have been working really hard. I want to commend Ebony for her courage and for Anthony and for their families' courage. I mean, we've been up and down this country, and every time we walk into a room, mostly because Nkechi makes sure that we're invited into that room, and Jesselyn McCurdy Jesselyn and Nkechi went to the mat to fight to get our matriarch, Phyllis Hardy, home, who served 23 years. Not everybody gets clemency, and they still get long sentences. And we have a front row of National Council sisters who are all here. Justine Moore served 16 years. Sharon White served 14 years. Matilda Hall served 18 years. Her sons, 3 sons, are currently serving life with no parole. Virginia Douglas, 15 years. Willie Hardy, forever. He's our honorary dad of the movement. Phyllis Hardy, of course. We went to the mat to bring Miss Phyllis home, who had a very severe heart condition. We were afraid she was going to die. Sharon White, very serious medical condition. We were afraid they were going to die in prison. After 23 years, we finally, with the help of Nkechi and Jesselyn McCurdy, pulled Miss Phyllis, grandma we call her, out of prison. We have Jillian Vandecruz, who was in prison so long that she trained the COs. She worked at Unicor, and she ran accounts receivable, and she trained the COs. Virginia trained the officers in how to do their job as they came to oversee them in the prison. Decades, many of them met our dear baby girl, Kemba, when Kemba was incarcerated. These women can tell you firsthand why we need to exercise clemency, why this is so incredibly important. All of these women serve drug cases, and they have, it's not just them, the destruction that the sentencing laws have done to our families and to our communities, multiple generations of our people are incarcerated. Many of the women who are currently serving federal prison drug sentences are there because of conspiracy. They are mothers. Mr. Austin, we had the privilege during the Obama administration to be invited to the White House several times. We went across the country with Miss Alice's postcards and put them on chairs in over 15 law schools across this country. We are carrying still with us, sir, the postcards from Michelle West. We are imploring that this administration please release Mr. Underwood, please release Michelle West. These are people that we have carried around with us. Ramona Brandt, who we lost. Yes. She was a valiant fighter who came out. We pushed her out, and she was able to have lunch with President Obama, and she hit the ground running up until the time she died of a heart attack as a result of this system and this work. And so we did, though. I'll get to the point, Nkechi, I really want to say there's two areas that at the National Council we are really trying to raise awareness of how clemency could be used. The title of this was what clemency could be. And Mr. Austin, we had the pleasure in the 1st district where I'm from in Massachusetts that we actually kept a young mother, 24 years old, Brandy Williams, through a restorative justice process that started under the Obama administration and is pretty much, except in Massachusetts, been forgotten about. Brandy was facing 10 years, mandatory minimum sentence. She's home. She didn't go to prison because of this very loophole. And those are the young women and women in general, but these mothers, when you go into a federal prison, it will break your heart. It broke my heart, and I was a criminal defense attorney. And to go into this prison and to see so many young mothers who were doing 10 and 15-year mandatory minimum sentences was heartbreaking. Clemency is the only thing currently that is going to allow an immediate second look to allow these young women to come home to their children. Otherwise, what happens is Jillian Vandercruz did 17 years in a federal prison and came home, and in less than a year, her daughter had died. These are the things that happen to the families while people are spending their time in these prisons. And so being able to use clemency in a very creative way, when we miss those opportunities of the very rare occasion to give somebody a loophole to not go in and to really take a second look once they're in there and say, we can look at your PSI. We can tell from that PSI that what you did was 5 years ago. You have dramatically changed your life over those 5 years. Brandy was in college. Imagine if she didn't get that one opportunity and it actually landed in there doing a 10-year mandatory, completely unnecessary sentence. The second group that we really want people to think about is all of those people who didn't, again, receive retroactivity. They need to come home. They were sentenced under a very cruel and unjust disparity. And that needs to change. We have already said, Congress has already said, this was wrong and partially corrected it. Well, those folks need to come home. And a very defined group of people that could receive clemency are those people that should have come home, that need to come home, that are just like the women sitting right in front of you, who literally, I was in prison. These women fed me. They cared for me. They got me up off the ground when I went to prison and left a 5-month-old baby boy behind. These are the women that helped me to get through to the other end. I had to figure out how to navigate 24 months. I was in prison with women who had already served 10 and 15 years and had another 20 to go. So there are changes that need to be made. We have a long list. I'm going to end here, Nkechi. I know my time is up, but I just want to say I'm going to call this my angel list now. My angel said to us, and under the leadership of Amy Pova, thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amy.
Under the leadership of Can-Do Clemency, Amy Pova is on our board at the National Council. She is one of our National Council members from day one, and we have followed her lead in terms of elevating the names and the voices of the people that need to come home. And my angel, you asked us when we started this, if we don't know 10 people that need to come home, I'm gonna take 2 seconds and I'm gonna give you 10 names. Dorothy Henry, She served 16 years and she was in prison with Miss Alice Johnson. Michelle West, she needs to come home. Corinne Seals, William Underwood, Roberta Bell, Elisa Castillo, Patricia Cooney, LaShonda Hall. Life for Pot. Where's my Beth?
There she is, right there.
Everybody on the
Yes.
Life for Pot list. If you want to get some people out, John Knock, her brother, serving life with no parole for marijuana.
Yes.
Clearly defined group of people, Life for Pot. Laz, our dear Laz, or Daz needs to come home, and every single body else who I could not mention who is on that can-do clemency list. Amy Pova has done her homework for years to let us know who needs to come home. We need to bring these people home, unquestionably. Thank you.
Let's give up Carol. Wow. This is truly powerful, and we're going to continue the conversation. Don't get up just yet, but in the lounge, I think there's cookies and something on. Good boy, you're still here, etc. I really want to thank everyone for coming. I really wanted to thank George Washington Law School, my alma mater, okay? And Team Roger Fairfax for helping to facilitate it. I wanted to thank all of the volunteers from the various Justice Roundtable organizations. And I just want to say, I don't know if Bella Boss is still here, but when we're in their lounge, I understand that you might share a little spoken word with us. Again, there were a couple of questions. I want to invite us to do those questions we had a couple of ground rules, and some of them kind of went afoul of the ground rules, so I didn't want to go on and raise them at this time. But I think Mark said, if there's one issue that we can come together on, no matter what your political philosophy is, no matter what your party is, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, it is and it's got to be and it must be the issue of clemency.
Yeah.
I just want to say clemency is justice. Thank you.
So I'm speaking to the students now. You imagine in your life that in your first semester you failed a subject. You picked yourself up and you had a change of mind and a change of heart, and you do everything right for the next 3 semesters and you make straight A's. But at the end of the year, you receive a failing grade because they tell you that only what you did the first semester counts. That's what life without the possibility of parole tells you. So I'm thankful to be a face of hope, not only for prisoners, but a face of hope for those who are free yet in prison. So I thank you again for having me here today. May God bless you and may you continue the fight.